Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight for our latest edition of Movie Discussion Night with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Before we get started, I would just like to say a special thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support in all of our free virtual programs that we get to put on. And of course, support for the foundation coming in the memory of Pat Finley. So thank you to the Finley family as well. We are here tonight to talk about military movies, war movies. And tonight we are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, anybody out there can correct me, we are looking at our first made-for-TV movie. I don't think we've done that yet. Morris, I see that you're connected. Welcome. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm well. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. Lisa, how are you tonight?
I'm well, thank you.
Awesome. And I know Sally's there. I know she hasn't started her video or unmuted herself yet. Maybe she's got something else going on. But like I said, this is our, if I'm not mistaken, our first made-for-TV movie. And it is called Ike Countdown to D-Day from 2004, directed by Robert Harmon. When I looked him up, I did not see any major motion pictures that I recognized. He only had a couple on his credentials, mostly TV series and movies. As well for the cinematographer, David Gribble. Oh, there's Lisa, or I'm sorry, Sally. How are you, Sally?
Hi. I'm all right. And yourself?
We're surviving. We've made it to Friday. Thank goodness. Cinematography was done by David Gribble. He is mostly known for doing TV as well, although I did notice that he was a cinematographer for Cadillac Man with Robin Williams, and also The 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas, which I'm a fan of that movie. I like watching that one every once in a while. If you have not seen The 13th Warrior, I would recommend it. It's a good watch. It's a little long, but it's a good movie to watch. This movie stars Tom Selleck, of course, as Ike Eisenhower, James Remar as Omar Bradley, Gerald McRaney as General Patton, and we'll talk a little bit more about him, Timothy Bottoms as Beetle Smith, General Beetle Smith, and Ian Moon as Winston Churchill. Principal photography for this film was done in New Zealand, which surprised me. And I didn't see any dates when they were filming this, so I have none of those to report. This was produced by A&E Television Network, and because it was done for television, I have no budget or box office receipt numbers to report either. So we'll jump right into it, and we'll start with Morris. Since he's relatively new to joining us for this program. Morris, the first thing we do is just go around and see just briefly what everybody thought of the film. What did you think?
I thought they kept the data down to a manageable level, and they gave just enough information to convey the depth. For example, all the planning. We couldn't possibly talk about all the plans. Also, sure. They zeroed in on specific attitudes and attributes of some of the people, like Montgomery. Is he always wrong? You know, that kind of thing. So I thought
that was one of the questions I had. We'll talk about that.
I'll take it back, Your Honor. But anyway, I thought that they had done a good job of a summary of what could have been a 12-hour movie.
Sure. Sally, how about you?
I enjoyed it. I just finished a trilogy by Jeff Chihara books about World War II, and they focused on D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. And had I not read those, I might not have understood as much about this movie, but it was crystal clear to me, a lot of the things. And they captured the essence of the characters, I thought, extremely well.
I think this is the first movie this year that you've liked.
I know. So it can happen.
It can happen. Lisa, how about you? What did you think of the film?
I'm going to put a combination of Morris and Sally. I thought that I didn't even think of that, Morris, actually, but it was, concise enough that at the same time, Sally read the books, the refresher history, and I was like really intently listening, trying to follow everything so that I could understand. But I'm thankful that it wasn't more thick so that I couldn't get through it. So I appreciate both of those things. And I enjoyed it. Okay.
All right. And then last but not least, Chris.
Yes, I'm the outlier here.
Oh no,
I,
that's right.
I
We always got to have a dissenting
Yeah,
voice in the report, I suppose.
I wasn't convinced by the characters at all.
Okay.
I just couldn't get past. To start with, I couldn't get past Tom Selleck as Eisenhower. I kept seeing Magnum
Magnum
PI.
PI.
Yeah, that's what I just kept seeing. And the other and so many of the other characters just seemed like at least the ones we might know well just seemed like caricatures, almost cartoon characters.
Okay.
I thought Omar Bradley, not Omar Bradley, but Patton. I just could not believe that one. It seemed like a cartoon. I think part of the problem that I had with it was that it was not a movie made for theater, and as a result, because it was for A&E and for television, they really had to tone down a lot of the language, a lot of the attitudes that probably prevailed at the time with such intense decisions that had to be made. I mean, they would sit around and occasionally there'd be a little bit of a temper, but I just thought that I didn't believe the dynamic that was actually the dynamic that would have been occurring in leading up to those decisions. So for television, it was probably okay, but I kind of like, all I could think about was Saving Private Ryan and the opening scenes and of what D-Day was like. Even though they talked about the potential casualties, it didn't really come to life. I mean, it was just numbers, and you don't. And I had to think about what the opening scenes in Private Ryan were like to imagine what they were probably talking about.
Yeah, with 70% casualties, 80% casualties, depending on what was going to happen, and you're right in that sense. You can't wrap your head around what that really means. It sounds like a big number, but the reality of it was much larger than that, for sure.
And I was a little disturbed they didn't go into the paratroopers more, because they played a significant role and really got pretty much wiped out. It was pathetic.
Yeah, and I do have some questions about that as well. They did kind of go into that, but not in a way that we would be used to seeing. When you're talking about maybe Band of Brothers or The Longest Day, and that's what I kept referring it back to, at least in my head, was The Longest Day and how it was different. Longest Day, I know we've done that before. It's probably maybe back in 2022 we did that. And which reminds me, we've been, no offense to you, Morris, but us four, we've been doing this for 4 years now. It doesn't seem like it's been 4 years that we've been gathering once a month on a Friday night to talk about movies, but we have. And I want to go back and count up how many movies we've watched. Us four, we've been a constant the whole time. Which is great, and we've had a lot of other people come in and out. But 4 years now we've been doing this. Wow.
That's really
I enjoyed the film. Like you said, Chris, it made for TV, so it did have a different feel to it. And like I said, I keep referencing it back to The Longest Day and Morris's point. It could have easily been a 12-hour movie if you start looking at all the aspects and all the planning and all the details that had to go into it. But it wasn't. It was only hour 36, I think. So I'm sorry.
89 minutes.
89 minutes. Yeah. So it was manageable, but you did lose a lot of the pieces, I guess, for lack of a better term, at least as far as I was concerned. This film was, I had watched it when it first came out, back when I had cable TV back in 2004. And I hadn't watched it since. It was brought back to my attention at the end of last summer. Our museum director, we all sat down, the whole museum staff, and watched this kind of like a team building exercise, looking at aspects of leadership and whatnot. And so I thought it'd be an interesting film to throw into the mix. Maybe You know, I'm not going to say I'm not going to do another made-for-TV movie, but they don't seem to be overly abundant as far as options go. So, I mean, maybe this might be the only made-for-TV film that we actually review. Go ahead, Morris. Sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I watched the movie and I thought that it was a great table of contents. So that
Oh, yeah, sure. That's a good way to look at it.
it leads you to doing some more research. So I'm a member of Post 501, American Legion Post here in Madison. And what we did was we actually held a D-Day ceremony. And we did not show the movie because that's a copyright thing anyway, but I watched the movie beforehand, and then I used some of the concepts when we did our presentation. And actually, it was filmed by WKOW-TV and appeared on TV. So everything we said was only at this much of the entire. So I think that, with all respects to everyone who thought there was not enough information, it's the monkey paw.
Yeah.
Here, turn the page, keep reading. Thank you so much.
Chris, I know that you and I have talked about the questions that everybody, I know, and Lisa, I know you received the questions. You emailed me right away and said you received them. Sally and Morris, did you receive the questions okay via email? Perfect, yes. Good deal. And as I was looking through them tonight, prior to getting started here, I realized there's a couple typos, and I did ask the same question twice. So I won't ask it again the second time, but the first question I asked is, and I think we already kind of know the answer, but do you think the film accurately portrayed the immense amount of logistical planning that went into the invasion for the Allies? And I know, you know, obviously the answer is no, but for 89 minutes and what they were trying to focus on, do you think you got a pretty good grasp of how much planning had to go into this?
I think if you worked at a company or you were in the service, your experiences would fill in. But if you didn't have that background, you'd be looking at a show.
Sure. I agree.
I thought that the closest you got to any sense of the scale was when they were moving some of those items around the map on the wall. And even though that wasn't the invasion itself, it gave you a sense of the size of the task they confronted as the various German elements were moved around on that map.
And I didn't realize that, you know, I always think of Omaha and Utah. I didn't realize how many other sections of the beach were involved.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are 5 sections. Juneau, Bold, Omaha, Utah, right. And oh my God, somebody help me out with the last one. I should know better than this.
Oh, I know. That was the one that was assigned to Patton.
Yeah, up in the Pas-de-Calais, where they had the diversionary force right. set up with the inflatable tanks and everything else. Yeah, and I agree pretty much with everybody saying. I looked at least from this first question, I looked at it from more of a historical frame of mind. And when you're studying history or when you're writing history, you're either looking at a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, particularly with the military. If you think back to The Longest Day, that had a good combination of both. I thought you were looking at not only the regular soldiers, but also the officers that are trying to plan the invasion. This was strictly focused on the top level of officers, the top minds that are making these decisions. Eisenhower, Churchill, Smith, Bradley. We really didn't see any enlisted troops at all. There was one who was being assigned to the headquarters. I think he had 2 lines. Other than that, I really don't think we heard from the enlisted soldiers at all. It was all from the top looking down, which is a unique perspective, and it can be interesting. It could also be kind of, you know, I don't want to say mundane, but maybe a little too convoluted in not being able to see the forest through the trees, basically.
I kind of in the scene where Eisenhower goes to meet the paratroops. I kind of wondered whether the female driver was the woman he was having the affair with.
I don't know anything about an affair. I wouldn't doubt it. Maybe
There's
it
a
might
woman
be
named
something
Kay
on that
something. I
fence.
forget what her last name was, but yeah, it was a bit of a, I don't know if it was a bit of a scandal, but it was I guess it was pretty well known.
Well, that's unfortunate. I always held Eisenhower kind of like in high regard, and any infidelity I find kind of disgusting. So that just knocked him down a peg on my.
Sorry about that.
That's all right, no problem. From the outset, Eisenhower is insisting on total control of the invasion, supreme Allied commander. He's receiving some pushback, not only from some of his allies that are his peers, but also from Churchill as well. What were the arguments against making him the supreme Allied commander, if anybody can recall?
Well, there were people, if I could jump in.
Morris, this is an open conversation. As long as you're not shutting anybody else down, you're more than welcome to jump in as you please.
Thank you. I think that there was a concern that maybe Montgomery would not be happy. They wanted to please everybody. Well, you can't do that in a war.
Yeah.
And that's my take on it.
Well, and particularly with Montgomery, it's interesting that you bring him up because he thwarted Patton quite a few times before the invasion. When you're looking at Africa, when you're looking at Italy and Sicily, there was a number of plans that Patton had proposed that were well received until Montgomery came along and basically shut everything down, and everybody kind of turned their attention to him. He was trying to do the same thing for the invasion force. He wanted to be the supreme Allied commander, or at least have more of a role in making those decisions. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way. Does anybody else have a thought on what the reasonings were against making Eisenhower the supreme Allied commander?
Oh, part of it was that there were multiple allies, and so putting a general from one of the allies in charge could be perceived as as kind of an insult to the other allies. That it was almost like they wanted a board meeting to prepare the invasion, rather than having a chairman of the board who had some authority over the other members of the board.
Do you think? And this kind of goes off of the film and more toward the historical record. But do you think maybe committee, reasoning and committee decisions would have been better than just one person, saying this is the way it's going to be, this is the way I want to execute?
Well, I thought I thought, as portrayed in the movie, Eisenhower managed that. I mean, it wasn't like he sat there and imposed on everybody without hearing from them. I mean, it was somebody has to make the decision on something like that. As Morris was saying, I mean, it's not really democracy when it comes to managing a military campaign. So you have to decide who's going to be in charge, who's going to have the overall authority. But that doesn't mean that everybody else gets knocked out.
Sure.
I mean, they have to have a role because they have certain expertise that maybe the person at the top doesn't. So, but it's the obligation of the person at the top to try to integrate all that information, all the other policy issues that go into it, all the other even political issues that arise, and come up with a decision that, in that person's view, best accommodates all those various interests. And I don't think it was it wasn't like the people in the group didn't want somebody in charge. The question was who was going to be in charge. I mean, you look at Montgomery. I mean, it was pretty clear.
And that was one of Montgomery's complaints, was that, okay, fine, we need one person in charge, but you're putting the least experienced person in charge, the person who has no combat experience at all, relatively new to the war, really has just been in Washington, and now all of a sudden you're going to make him the supreme Allied commander. I don't get that.
Well,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris. Finish up.
Well, Eisenhower didn't have combat experience in the Second World War, but he did have some from First World War, and
Very,
maybe that's
very
a little
little.
maybe that's a little out of date, but you know.
Yeah.
If I bring things back to the movie, for example, the reason for making it one person was that you dispense with all the petty rivalries. And then the movie later on came back and showed some of those petty rivalries. Like, for example, Montgomery is more concerned about pulling a flake of dust or cotton off of an enlisted person's uniform. As far as Patton goes, they've got him practically begging, and he's so duplicitous. I don't want to get into that other question, but
Sure.
The thing is, the reason for having one person in charge was answered when de Gaulle came into the movie.
Oh, God.
And it was, if you didn't do it the French way, it was wrong.
I just wanted to reach through the screen and smack de Gaulle. He was just the hubris was just thick and oozing out of him. I mean, it was just like, dude, get on board. We're trying to save your country here.
But I think that I think that what Chris is saying is really, they had only 89 minutes, and so they had to deal in stereotypes.
Yeah.
And you're saying caricature. I'm thinking, yeah, this feeds our understanding and belief of people, you know, like that's the only way they could, you know, treat it at the beginning of the movie and then within a half hour answer it. That's, you know, when you decide on a TV movie for 90 minutes or less, what can you do, Chris?
And I don't want to belabor the point about Eisenhower being the Supreme Allied Commander, but the decision was made to make him that. Why did they decide him as opposed to Montgomery or Patton or some of the other generals they were considering? Does anybody recall? No.
But it seemed
Sorry.
like
Go ahead, Lisa.
I don't know specifically, but it seemed like he had a little bit of rapport with Churchill.
Certainly did. And there's one scene where he's talking to Churchill and they're like, okay, well, if it's not me, who's it going to be? And they start going through the other commanders. And there was just qualities about them that weren't going to work. You know, Montgomery was, you know, he had his hubris behind him. Patton was maybe a little uncontrollable. You know, maybe some of the other generals didn't have the qualities that they thought should fit. And that's why they decided to go with Eisenhower ultimately. You know,
it might be that in a sense he was an administrative general.
Yeah, I mean, that's
what they really needed.
And he didn't have that broad combat experience like the rest of them did. He was more, you know, the paper pusher, looking at the maps on the wall, moving the little ticks and tacks everywhere. Maybe that was his forte, right?
Yeah, I mean, he and in that sense, unlike Patton, he wasn't committed to armor. You know, he didn't have a commitment to a particular kind of military element, whether it was infantry, paratroops. I mean, he could look at this and try to weigh it in a way that officers that were had come up through various branches of the military might kind of favor that as the preferred way of mounting the attack.
He did have one aspect of attack that he really didn't like. It was being played out during the time. Can anybody remember what that was? No, it was, if you remember the scene where they're talking about, you know, how we prepare for this. And they were talking about the Army Air Corps and the carpet bombing campaign, day after day after day, just bombing the hell out of these people everywhere. You know, Eisenhower was saying that if we go that route, yes, we will win. We will minimize losses for the Allies. We will not minimize losses for civilians, and we will destroy cities that have been around for centuries. We will destroy Paris. We will destroy Berlin. We will destroy all these cities and just to rubble. And he was not going to go down that road.
I think the phrase that he used in the movie was, "We're here to liberate Europe, not to destroy it."
Exactly. Yep. Morris, did you have a point to bring up, or was that?
Yep.
Okay.
Liberate, not destroy. And the other corollary to that was that how can you have people going over in order to destroy something? Who's going to want to volunteer for that?
Well, quite honestly, nobody's going to volunteer for it. If you're told to do it, you go out and do it. You maybe don't feel good about it. And then maybe after a while, you start to, I don't want to say rebel, because you certainly weren't going to see that in World War II. That would just get you lined up against a wall. But, orders are orders.
Yeah, who wants to be the first one off the LST?
That too, right? We have touched on Patton, and I don't, everybody knows Patton is my guy. I am an armor guy. Patton has always been my hero. We're both Southern California boys. So I don't want to talk about him too much, but I do want to get into Gerald McRaney's role. And by the way, this is the only time that you will see both Gerald McRaney and Tom Selleck without their signature mustaches. Anything else you watch by these two, you're gonna see those big brooms hanging off the bottom of their nose, but not this one. And so why was Eisenhower considering sending Patton home? I mean, he's always been kind of a rebellious general. He's always been kind of hard to control, but there was one incident in particular that really, yeah, go ahead, Morris.
No,
Go ahead, Morris.
Okay. Well, throughout this whole movie, there was a thread of humanity. Humanity this, humanity this.
Oh.
And I think that Patton lost his right to be kept.
Mhm.
And I think the scene afterwards, when he goes back and he tells the Jeep driver, I took care of him.
That was not the case, though. He
Yeah.
was very humbled in Eisenhower's office. Very humbled.
But again, talking about humanity, Eisenhower said, this is your last opportunity to have a command. It's going to be a mock command, but at least this is the way you can leave on top of something. And that shows how Eisenhower considers humanity at all decision points.
Yeah, and more than that, though, it was a chance for Patton to prove himself that he could keep his mouth shut, follow orders. He does get another combat command after the invasion is successful. And there was something I just wanted to bring up too. The reason that they were going to send Patton home was the soldier slapping incident.
Right.
Mhm.
Patton, just to familiarize everybody, there was a soldier who was in a medical tent, was suffering from shell shock, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. Still, World War I is when we start to see shell shock, but even by World War II and even in the Korean War, it's not really recognized as something that can be treated. It's seen more as cowardice, and that's what Patton dubbed this soldier, as a coward, and he smacked him. And it got around in the press, especially here back home, and it was a very unpopular move on his part, and that's why he was being considered to be sent home. And like Morris said, the humanity of Eisenhower, and there is a quote that I'll bring up later by Eisenhower that fits that perfectly, but he decided to give Patton one more chance. If he could just toe the line, keep himself straight, then you will be able to participate in the war, as opposed to going back to DC and pushing a pencil at a desk, which that Patton would have, he would have had a stroke or a heart attack and died. That is not who that man was.
It was, I think it was in that scene where it was one of the few instances where you see Eisenhower with genuine emotion as he berates Patton for that slapping incident. I mean, you can just tell he is angry as hell about what he did to that. And it's sort of contrasted with, you sort of get a sense of why he probably felt that way when, again, towards the end of the movie with the paratrooper scene, where he's out there with the troops and respecting the troops and the work they're going to do, and that contrasts with what Patton's attitude presumably was with towards that fellow that was suffering from shell shock.
Yeah, I mean, Patton loved his boys. As long as they were pushing forward, sacrificing, whatnot. Once you stop doing that, he stopped loving you. That's just the way Patton was. We also talked briefly about General Montgomery, and I can't remember if it was Morris or Chris who brought it up, or maybe it was Lisa or Sally. I can't recall. But he always seemed to be on the wrong side of every decision. I'm certainly not asking everybody to be a Montgomery historian, but do you think that the film accurately portrayed Montgomery, or do you think maybe it kind of, well, he's our British knockaround, and so we're gonna just make him the folly of every decision that goes out? He's saying the exact opposite of what happens and what is successful.
I thought I thought the Montgomery character was one of those cartoonish characters.
Yes, I agree.
I just, I didn't see how he could have gotten there, could have been as successful as he was and been wrong all the time. I just think that was the way they had to portray him for the movie, that he was on the outs in a sense, and one of the reasons he was on the outs was because his decisions were not the ones that others wanted to follow, so he always seemed wrong. Loud but wrong.
I think that if you're a student of European wars, they had a buddy system, and there was such a great gap between the leaders and their men, and that followed all the way through. Montgomery was an old timer, and his tactics were almost like the park and bark, stand and shoot, and you just don't move. That's not the way the Americans treat it. They treated it as like
Gotcha.
SWAT action, and that's so. Montgomery, for his people, was accurate, but for our approach to it, he was not appropriate. I agree with you as far as the caricature, but I think it was accurate, and I think he was just like the other generals who had to have it just so. And again, I refer back to de Gaulle.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just agreeing.
Yeah, certainly European mindset to warfare, it was definitely different than American mindsets at this time. Both sides, all sides, even today, where you fight the current war based on your past experiences. So you're fighting the last war currently. And so coming into World War II, certainly Montgomery had this old guard sort of mentality for sure. And I don't want to put the guy down, but he wasn't as good as everybody said during the time. And that was evidenced big time when the invasion finally went off, and he was supposed to capture, Caen, within just a couple of days. And after a week, he still hadn't captured it. So I don't think that he was all that in a bag of chips. He might have been half a sandwich in a bag of chips, but he wasn't the full sandwich in the bag of chips, at least in my opinion, from the studying that I've done. And particularly going back to Patton, because those two were rivals for so long. Every time you study something about Patton, Montgomery inevitably comes up.
That's a good question, though.
Sure. Oh, sorry.
Good question.
Oh, thank you. Not surprisingly, but kind of surprisingly at the same time, we have Major General Miller sitting at dinner, having a few cocktails, and he starts to run his mouth right there in front of God and everybody. Aside from, the loose lips scenario, what other kind of security issues were covered in the film that the Allies had? Much less somebody just having too many drinks and I couldn't believe when he started running his mouth like that. I mean, I could, but I couldn't.
Sally?
Oh, no, you muted, Sally.
You're muted.
I'm just thinking that I didn't really pick up much big time security. Otherwise, why would he be sitting at that table with that? I think it was his wife. I don't know. Shooting his mouth
I highly
off
doubt
and
it
getting
was his
drunk.
wife.
Yeah, she was English, so it probably wasn't.
He
But
looked a little young too.
it was just bizarre to me that thing could even happen. I mean, I just found it security seemed to be a little lax.
And maybe you
Maybe
might
I'm
expect
wrong.
that from a private, I certainly don't want to denigrate, the sergeant corps because I was a sergeant myself, but a major general to just be
It's
running
just
his mouth
odd.
like that is crazy. Sorry, go ahead, Morris.
If he's into drink, that takes away your power of, discerning
Good
which
decision making and yeah,
It,
It does.
it sounds like he had a habit because he said,
Yes.
I promise I won't take one more ever. And he said, we know that's not going to happen. And then he agreed with him.
Mhm.
No, that's a good point, Lisa. I didn't put that puzzle piece together when I was watching it. I just thought maybe, he'd gotten drunk and ran his mouth. But yeah, no, maybe alcohol was, something
I
that he
agree.
had troubles with in the past and was battling for sure. And especially during this time, I mean, everybody's drinking everywhere.
I think there's so many things in this movie that you could call symbolic. That
Sure.
it wasn't maybe that person who did it, but it was a trend that could have happened. And that's why I think that they were able to get by with 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Things as
And-
examples.
Yeah, and certainly other security issues. There were spies everywhere on all sides.
Yeah,
The observation. The English Channel is not a great distance across. You could literally be on the French coast with a good high-powered pair of binoculars and see the English coast. So there was a lot of issues besides people just running in their mouth. And how do you keep, 1 million men cooped up in the southern part of England getting ready to invade? How do you keep that a secret for so long? And that really came into play as they're trying to decide, should we go in June, the beginning of June? The next available time is mid-July. Are you going to be able to keep that secret for another 5-6 weeks? Highly doubt it. So there was a lot of security concerns during this time. And then if you think back to The Longest Day too, they really hammered that in a few spots prior to the invasion. A guy wants to send a note back to his wife who's having a baby. It's not his baby, but she's still having a baby. And just so many different issues. And this kind of goes back to what Morris was saying about how that this is kind of like a table of contents. These are all things that not only Ike, but the top brass, the top decision makers, they had to consider as they're making their decisions, they're formulating their plans. How long can we keep this secret? How long can we keep these guys quiet and hidden and just unnoticed by the Germans altogether? Fortunately for the Allies, Hitler was in charge and he wasn't making very good decisions at all, and nobody was willing to contradict him. That was a death sentence right there. So his poor decision making, along with all of our security features during the time, I think really allowed for the invasion to go off as it did, unnoticed and pretty much by surprise.
That the issue about the security and sort of the question about how could this possibly happen. I was thinking about the contrast between that and the security that was imposed on Bletchley Park with Turing and his or the thousands of people that were involved out at Los Alamos with the nuclear project, and how the security there was so tight. And yet here with this the biggest invasion in world history, basically, you get this sense that people were just kind of walking around talking to whoever they wanted to talk to about this stuff.
Yeah. Could I ask a question of the group?
Certainly.
What did you think of the treatment of the weather forecasting?
I thought that was,
I'll defer.
I will-
I'll go last.
I will go first. I'll go first because both of my children are weather. So yeah, it's like it's theory and you're putting stuff together and it really, you don't even know if it's going to be accurate until it's upon you, but because you're using all these models and stuff. And back then, probably, wow. So
Yeah, no
I thought they
Doppler or
were
anything
pretty-
like that.
Yeah, I thought they were pretty harsh on him because he was trying his best.
I thought it was out of character for Eisenhower to treat him that way. I mean, it didn't seem consistent with what he was like in the rest of the movie.
Except for his treatment of Patton, right?
Well, but Patton was, a peer.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't get the sense that Eisenhower would typically berate somebody who was trying to do his job as best he could, given the uncertainties that weather forecasting had at that time. I mean, I would have thought that Eisenhower would have known that, as who was it? Was it Bradley or somebody said, he doesn't make the weather; he just tries to figure it out.
Yeah, I've always felt historically bad for was it Lieutenant Stagg or Captain Stagg? I can't recall what his rank was, but his last name was Stagg. He was the chief meteorologist there, and yeah, I mean he was assigned an almost impossible task. And like Lisa said, this is before we have any serious weather technology. You're looking at models, you're getting reports from 100 miles away, 200 miles away, trying to best to see how this storm is going to roll through it at what time. Gosh, I don't think there's a week that goes by that I don't grumble at weather forecasters today. I feel sorry for the guy, honestly.
And it seems like that might have been the major mystery in the whole movie.
Yeah.
What's the weather going to be like in the next 6 hours?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, that is all historically accurate. All that really happened. And that was one of their chief considerations. Like they were saying, they were talking about how the storm would affect the landings, how the storm would affect the paratroopers the night before. And we were talking about the paratroopers earlier. I did want to mention, and I know I had the question here somewhere. I think I've already passed it. Oh no, it's right here. The major issue with the airborne component. They wanted to drop them in so far away that they weren't going to be able to support the invasion force itself, but that would lower the casualties of the airborne. If you drop them in closer, they're going to have higher casualties, but they'd be able to support. And I just thought it was interesting that the way that conversation played out in the film. It really wasn't addressed like that in other D-Day films that I've seen. And I was just curious what everybody's thought was on that.
I thought it was kind of an interesting example of the dilemmas that they faced in trying to allocate responsibility for various aspects of the invasion. I mean, you had to decide about the ships, you had to decide about the armor, you had to decide about the infantry, you had to decide about the airborne, and obviously the airborne was treated as a critical feature of the invasion, but how you implement it had enormous consequences for so many. Would theoretically have enormous consequences for so many other things. I mean, I thought it was interesting when they projected, what was it, the 70 or 80% casualty rates, and then after the invasion began, the casualty rate was something like 20 or 30%.
Mm-hmm.
So forget about whether you can predict the weather. You're having trouble even predicting what's going to be happening
Well,
regardless of the weather.
wasn't this partly because the Germans had made the wrong conclusion? Had they known that Omaha was going to be the landing site, it could well have been 70%.
Sure.
Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. No, the Germans were for the most part steadfast, convinced that it was going to be the Pas de Calais. It was going to be done at a certain time under certain conditions. It was because we had done these invasions before under these certain times, these certain conditions. This is how the Americans have always done it, or the Allies rather have always done it. And we totally turned the book around for the D-Day landings. And yeah, you're right, Morris, that absolutely caught them off guard. Had they been able to figure that out, had they been able to move all their forces in strength to secure those beaches, I don't even think that 70 or 80% would be realistic. I think maybe the landings would have failed completely.
Yeah. I was struck by the concept of here we are Americans, safe in our own continent, coming over to tell the Europeans that we're coming here to take care of this and finish it for you because you guys can't do it. What I can't wrap my mind around what the Europeans must have thought about us.
Well, we had just done that exact same thing 30 years prior in World War One. World War One is where I focus a lot of my historical studies on, and I am convinced, along with a lot of other historians as well, that America's involvement in 1917 with the war ending in 1918, it was because of our presence there. And so we, coming into World War II, I can see how we still have the same mindset. We already got your goose out of the jam earlier. Here we are to do it again for you.
Well, since Eric, you mentioned World War One, have you ever heard of the Hello Girls?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, that stage presentation just came through Madison a few months ago, and our historian, Kevin Hampton at the museum, gave a rather, it was maybe like an hour and a half presentation about the Hello Girls prior to the performance. And every time, I think he went out there 4 times over the course of 2 weeks to give this presentation. And every time it was almost a full house, 150 to 200 people would show up to watch Kevin just talk about the Hello Girls, the history behind them. And then, then they would go in and watch the performance. And it just added so much context.
Is everyone else familiar with the Hello Girls?
No.
Eric, do you want to give a short?
So they were female telephone operators. They were one of the first groups of females to be, in military service.
Right.
And what their job was to make sure that all telephone communication between not only the United States and England, but France as well, was, basically understandable, routed to the right places. And it's quite an extraordinary story. And as a matter of fact, there's a gentleman, and I can't think of his name right now. He produced a documentary, and he's been trying to work with us for the past year or so in being able to screen this. We have not made it. We haven't got to the point where we're ready to do this yet. But it's still something that we're working on. We have the capability at the museum to show films like this to a audience of maybe 70 or 80 people. So hopefully maybe within the next year, we can come to some sort of agreement with this producer and get this film screened at the museum. I think that would be fantastic.
Number one interest on that.
Yeah.
There's a popular, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sally.
I was just going to say there's a popular novel out that a lot of us oldies are reading called Switchboard Soldiers.
I haven't heard of that one. But I'll look.
Yeah, it's all about the ladies that you just described. They didn't call them the Hello Girls; they were called Switchboard Soldiers. That was the title of the book.
Anytime you talk of those operators like that, I always think of Lily Tomlin.
Yes.
One ringy dingy, two
ringy dingy.
I just have a question for you, Eric.
Sure.
it's unrelated to anything that occurred in the movie. Well, it's not totally unrelated. I'm just curious, do you know whether the D-Day invasion had any effect on the timing of the German generals attempting to assassinate Hitler on July 20th, about a month and a half later?
I don't. I could speculate, but I don't. I can't think of any source that I've come across that said that there's a direct correlation between their failures on D-Day and this attempt on Hitler's life. I would imagine that there was probably some of that involved. Some of these higher ups in the German army going, look, this guy's making terrible decisions. I know the German army was saying this internally, very quietly, of course, but internally, this guy's making terrible decisions. We're going to lose the war because of him. And maybe, the D-Day landings were just one more, feather in the cap for these guys. And the final straw, we got to get rid of them. They certainly weren't going to be able to do it by force. And so, let's try to put a bomb in a plane that he's flying in, or put a bomb under a table in a bunker that he's in. Neither worked, unfortunately. Maybe the war would have come to a more swift conclusion. But I can't see that there not being some sort of mentality in that, Chris. Absolutely. But like I said, I haven't come across any sources that say, yes, because of this, this happened. But like I said, I can't imagine that it's not the case.
Just as the Ike movie is sort of a lead-in to leadership dynamics, there's another German movie called Das Untergang, which is called The Downfall.
And Chris, we were just talking about that last time.
If you haven't seen it, you've got to set aside some time to see it. The Germans produced it, and only Germans could have done it because they mocked up the underground bunkers, and the camera was this far away from everybody's face. And that control that Hitler had over his people answers the question of how people were able to keep going despite the insanity of the war.
Yeah, the last movie we looked at was Inglourious Basterds from Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, and Chris had brought up the meme that you always see on the internet, and it doesn't matter if they're talking about the football game or a trip to Home Depot. It's always that scene of Hitler slamming his fist on the table going 9, 9, 9, 9. And so, yeah, it's ironic that you bring that up because we were just talking about that last month. We are starting to run short on time. I did want to bring up this quote, though, Morris, you were talking about the humanity in Eisenhower. And he does say, after he sends Major General Miller home, he says, it's easy to gamble with a million lives, but what's hard is to see how that can hurt one single person. And if you can't keep that straight, you'll lose your humanity. I did ask the question, what does he mean by this? But I think we've already, kind of sorted that out. But I did want to bring that quote up just to kind of come full circle with what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And then the last question I want to ask before we go into some other aspects, actually, you know what? Let's go into the other aspects first, because I did want to talk about some of the filmmaking. Like I said, this was a made-for-television film, but did you feel like you were watching a made-for-television film, or did you feel like you were watching a major motion picture?
TV.
No, everybody's pretty on board with it was TV, right?
TV.
And what I always like to try to bring in, something about the set designers or the costume department. And there wasn't really a whole lot to go with in this film.
No.
A little bit with the costume department, particularly with the uniforms. Not a whole lot with the set design, but did you think at least they tried and did a good job, or do you think maybe that that was where the least amount of the budget of the film was, and it showed?
My feeling about it is it did just what it needed to do to prove that people were wearing a uniform.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it didn't need to be a complicating factor.
I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't care for the photographs. They seemed like they were mock instead of primary sources.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if they were or not. At least, honestly, I don't. I couldn't get a whole lot of information on this film. A lot of the sources that I brought up, just maybe they just don't cover made-for-TV films, as well as they do major motion pictures. I will say though that the uniforms, I was rather impressed with the costume department to be able to accurately portray the so many different uniforms, even within the Americans. There was just so many variations to the uniform that these guys wore, not to mention the British and the French and everybody else. You had the small Eisenhower jackets with the really high-waisted pants. You just had so many different versions of the uniforms in World War II. When you're looking at the leadership, certainly not, that doesn't translate to the guys on the ground. They all wore the same thing. But I just thought the costume department did a decent job in trying to keep up with all the variations, and not just that, but also the proper placement of the ribbons, the insignia, excuse me, the rank. Sorry, hang on just a second. I thought they did a good job as far as that goes. Set design, yeah, it was like Morris said, it gave you just enough to make it believable, and that was it as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, the one.
Anyone who has been around in 1952 when Ike was running against
Me.
yeah, Utley, yeah. This film showed Ike being able to say things in maybe 10 words or less. That's not how he was in reality. I mean, he would go on and on and on and on. That's my opinion. You didn't ask that, but
like you said, Morris, 89 minutes.
yeah.
Well, I was just going to say on the set design, the one of the scenes that kind of caught me, maybe it's because of my background, was the scene where they do a close-up of somebody typing on one of those manual typewriters, and it's just going clackety, 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 clackety. I thought, okay, yeah, that was probably, if you think about the number of typewriters that they would have had operating there, the amount of noise that would have made.
Oh my gosh, right?
In a particular room.
I
didn't think of that, but you're right. You have 50 typewriters in a room and they're all pounding away. That has to be extremely loud.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation.
Especially if they had four sheets of paper and 3 carbons.
I know you're going to get to your last question, Eric. I just want to throw this in there that
Sure.
I was fortunate to visit England in the White Cliffs of Dover, and there's a underground museum that are actually like control bunkers and stuff, and it's super cool, super cool, because they have it all, I'm gonna use the word again, but this time differently. They have it all mocked up to be like it's actual. They have on the speakers, when you go into each room, it's like you're getting voices, and they have stuff cooking in the kitchen, and it's really cool. Really cool.
No, that sounds like an awesome place to visit. I've never been to the English Isles, or the British Isles rather, but I'll definitely keep that in mind if I get the chance. I've been to the Normandy beaches. I've been to the War Museum at Caen, and a few other places, but I have not been to England at all. And that sounds like something that would be right up my alley, especially being a museum guy.
Yeah, I've traveled a good bit, not extensively, but a good bit, and that's one of my favorite little museums that I've been in. So.
Well, thank you for that, Lisa. I'll definitely keep that in mind. So my last question, Morris, I asked this question, it's my closing question of every program that we do. Who was your favorite actor or character, and why? Chris, we'll start with you up in the upper left.
Literally, I don't have one.
You don't have one this time?
I just could not get into the characters. They didn't resonate with me. I mean, if I had to think about the characters that probably made the biggest impression, as an alternative way of thinking about that, the two characters that made the biggest impression, and they weren't good impressions, were Patton and de Gaulle. I
Mhm.
mean, they just they stood out. They stood out in that among a bunch of people who were just. I mean, to me, they were basically vanilla type characters, and the Patton character and the de Gaulle character were way beyond that. So they weren't favorites, but they made the biggest impression from my point of view.
All right, fair enough. Lisa?
Unless there's a name with a word on the bottom or something, I'm not good with the names. So even though you guys talk about them, sometimes I'm like, okay, which is that person? So the guy who picked the feather off,
Oh, so Montgomery. Okay. Yep.
Montgomery, Lee Montgomery. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to pick him. I just liked all his little different, I don't know if the word is idiosyncrasies, like
Mhm.
with the smoking and the when they all lit up after he just told he just like
I had
no.
forgotten about that scene. That was rather comical.
That was
Yeah.
hysterical.
So that was my pick.
Okay. Sally?
I like Tom Selleck playing Ike, even though he didn't look anything like Ike to me. I just liked his portrayal.
And Morse.
I'm going to have to say it was Selleck's impression. He probably was not exactly how Eisenhower is, because we probably don't know. But I think he maintained it all the way through from beginning to end. He kept a tight upper lip, a tight lower lip, good furrows in the eyebrows.
Mhm,
Mostly,
mhm.
he was a consistent actor all the way through. It's different if you're playing a bit role like de Gaulle, but I think Selleck took it very nicely all the way through.
I'm
And
laughing. I was trying to determine, were they really smoking or not? But then Selleck blew smoke out of his nose, and I went, oh, he must be.
he actually, I was just going to say this, he actually picked up the habits for the film. And then after the film was over,
That's why.
he dropped it. But Eisenhower was a 4-pack-a-day smoker.
Yes.
And that's why they show them smoking so much. And
Yeah.
Tom
Yes.
Selleck wanted to be true to the character. So he started smoking cigarettes, really started smoking
Okay.
cigarettes just for the film. Once the filming was over, he was able to put it down, fortunately for him.
Funny.
I've never been able to put it down, much to my chagrin. But God, 4 packs a day.
I
I
can't
smoke maybe
imagine.
half a pack a day. I can't imagine going through. You would have to constantly have one in your hand from the time
And he
you wake up
did.
to the time you go to bed.
Non-filtered.
Four packs unfiltered. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Not unfiltered.
Camel.
Some Pall
Luckies.
Malls or some Camels or some Lucky Strikes or something like
Luckies.
that.
That was the big one.
Yeah, I thought Tom Selleck, I thought he did, I liked his portrayal of Ike. I liked the way he ran the movie, and like Morris said, and Sally as well, he maintained the same tone. I mean, it was the same guy from start to finish.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was
I liked it.
he didn't let the character drop anywhere. He was focused. But of course, you know, like I said earlier, like I've always said, I'm a Patton guy. I really like Gerald McCraney. Although he just had a brief role in the film, I thought it was fantastic because, like we said earlier, it was 2 different Pattons. The one was begging to stay in, and then when he finally got a chance to stay in and he went back out to the car, he was like, yeah, I pulled one over on him. And I just like the way Gerald McCraney played that. And for some, and I don't know how they did it, but they made him short like Patton. Gerald McCraney's a rather tall guy. If you remember back to the TV show Major Dad, even he's healthy size. Patton was kind of a short guy, and I don't know if they elevated Tom Selleck up or lowered him down or whatever. I'm sure that they used perception and point of reference with the cameras to make him appear smaller. But I thought they did a